Today we're continuing the story of William Kennedy and Sons Company. We're pleased to have with us today a man who exemplified the company at its best. As a young boy on his parents' farm, he showed a great interest in farm machinery. In his life work, this grew with a special talent in repairs, tool design, and method development in the machine shops where he was a key figure. It's a great pleasure to welcome Elgin Walter and to hear about his life work and his memories of William Kennedy and Sons Company. It's great to have you with us today, Elgin. So, maybe we should begin at the beginning when you were a young boy on the farm. We'd like to hear about your parents and other family members.
Thanks, Jack. I suppose I can start, first of all, by doing what Dowsley Kennedy taught me to do. With any memo, put a date on it. And I'm going to do that right now. Today is September the 13th, 1997. And the time is now 1:25 p.m. I started my day in March 25th, 1917. And I was born and raised on a farm, a little 40-acre place on the southeast corner of Owen Sound on Superior Street. My dad had two farms eventually, bought a second farm in 1927. I was just 10 years old. And it was 134 acres, bordering on Harrison Park, running from number 6 and 10 highway all the way down to the Sydenham River and south to Rockford School. A lot of bush, but about 60 acres of the best working land I think I ever saw. My father and mother had 3 boys. My father was Norman Stanley Walter. My mother was Christina McMillan, before she was married. One of a family of 8, 4 boys and 4 girls. And my mother taught me a lot of things. She gave me answers to things when I wanted to know how things were made. She worked in factories. One of them was a cigar factory, and she told me how cigars were made. And she worked in a basket factory, and she told me how baskets were made. But my father couldn't tell me how the farm machinery was made, and I was curious about that. I could see the shafting, and I could see the parts of the mower and the hay rake and the binder and things like that, but I wanted to know how these parts were made and how a machine came about. They didn't grow on trees, I knew that, but I was curious at all stages of my life to know how things were done. And I grew up on the farm and went to public school back on the 10th line of Sydenham on SS-16. And when I graduated in 1930, I went to OSCDI. As soon as I got a look at that machine shop that they had at the school, I knew that was where I wanted to be. And I specialized in the machine shop. And I graduated in 1933.
Now you had a couple of very good teachers there.
Oh, yes. Norm Monroe was the machine shop teacher. H.C. McLean was the drafting teacher. J.R.O. Johnson was the mathematics teacher. And, anyway, almost as soon as I graduated, I got a job at the Circle Bar. I think it'd be a good time to tell you, Jack, give you a rundown on the things that I worked at and did from top to bottom.
All right.
I know that as I go along with this story, I'll get ahead of myself and I'll go from one place to another faster than I should. But my first job was the Circle Bar. After that, I worked for Law Construction. Then I went to business college for 6 months.
And that was a good move.
I think it was.
That was a wise
I think
move.
it was. And then, as soon as I got out of business college, I got a job at Dunbar's department store. And I worked there as an accountant, assistant accountant, I guess. And after that, I went to the co-op, and I did some bookkeeping there for a while.
Down on Second Avenue, the
Yeah.
Farmers Co-op.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
Then I went from there to the tannery. And it became obvious that I was never going to like bookkeeping. It just wasn't in my blood.
But it did train you
Oh, yes.
to be methodical and keep close records.
I wasn't getting any closer to my object in life, but I finally, after the tannery, I got a job at Corbett's. And I'll tell you how I got there later. Then I went from there to Kennedy's. Then out of Kennedy's, I was in the Navy for a while. Then I come back to Kennedy's. Then I left Black Clawson Kennedy's and went to Canadian Stone Marine down in Quebec. And after that, I came back to Russell Brothers in Owen Sound. And after Russell Brothers, I retired. Now that's a quick rundown of the way things went with me.
Mm-hmm.
Now then. Go back.
So you had a lot of experience, actually,
Yes,
in many fields.
It may seem like I was jumping around a lot, but in those days, I think I was being treated somewhat as a casual. Things came up that stopped the employment or made me move from one job to another. I never was fired, but I was never out of work. We had 3 boys on the farm, and I wasn't going to be one of the farmers, that's a sure thing. My older brother was ahead of me in line for a farm, and my younger brother, God knows what was going to happen to him. He was...
That was Alan, the youngest one.
Alan was the youngest.
Mm-hmm. And Mac was your older
5
brother.
years older than I.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, as I said before, I got the first job in the circle bar, and I was trained as a mechanic to repair knitting machines that made men's socks. And I'll tell you one thing, with all those girls down there, I got a lot of educating.
That'd be an education you hadn't previously had.
Right on. But anyway, I worked there until there was a big shutdown in the yarn supply house in Kincardine, and I was laid off. And I went from there. I think I told you I went to the tannery, but no, I didn't. I went to the law construction. They were paving the road from Chatsworth to Owen Sound.
Mm-hmm.
And on that farm, just north of Rockford School, we had a gravel pit. And the law construction company wanted shoulder material. Wanted 14,000 yards of material. And my mother made a deal with them that they could...
Your father had passed away by this time.
Pardon?
Your father had passed away?
Yes, he had passed away in 1934.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to work shoveling gravel, pick and shovel, and 35 cents an hour. And I weighed 117 pounds. I was over 6 feet tall. And I worked away there all summer, shoveling gravel for the shoulders of the road. We went, when that job was done, we went out to the long swamp towards Jackson. We ripped out the old corduroy road and repaved the road. And then, well, I guess that was when the fall came, the snow started to fly. I went in and started to work at the tannery.
And that was a different type of work altogether.
Yes, it was. It was a pretty stinking job, but it was a job, and it was interesting. I learned a lot of things about how leather was made. I had on the farm, I had helped to take the hide off a couple of cattle beasts, but I said I'd never want to do any more than that, but I did. I ended up helping on a leather splitting machine. The McQuay tannery didn't handle anything but cowhide, and it was an experience. I learned how many times they can split a leather hide off a cow on all the different pieces of harness that they made out of the various pieces of leather. And the part of a cowhide that you didn't use to make shoelaces, the piece that you didn't use to make reins for a team of horses, and what you did use for belting, machine belting. And it was an experience. The things that they use, the skin off of the bull's head. I learned the skin on a bull's head was as much as 1 3/4 inches thick. And it was used to make the suckers for pumps.
For goodness sakes.
It was so interesting.
Well.
When McQuay's, I think I had to leave once in the wintertime to take over the mail route, my brother's mail route, out through RR5. He got the flu or something, or pneumonia. And I left to take the mail, and I never went back to the tannery. The harvest time came on after that, and I was helping on the farm. And my mother still ran the farm after my father had passed away, ran both farms. And during the harvest time, I had to arrange for the threshing machine to come. And it was all laid on for a certain day, but the phone rang the night before. He came and announced that he wasn't coming because he'd burned a bearing out on the threshing machine.
Now this is Billy Millman was doing your threshing.
Billy Millman had his thresher, and we wanted our straw cut short, and he knew a farmer that didn't want his straw cut, so he was going to go to him. Anyway, I had to get this bearing fixed as quickly as possible because our grain was outdoors. And I took the bearing off his thresher, and I went the next morning on my motorcycle down to Kennedy's and asked them would they rebabbit the bearing, and they said no, they didn't have time, they didn't have anybody to put on it. So I left there and went over to Corbett's foundry and asked them to do it, and they said, well, we just don't have any men here, only the 2 of us in the shop, and we're busy doing something else, we can't touch the bearing today, we might get at it next week. So I suggested that if they'd allow me to do the job myself, I could do it, and using their equipment, and they agreed. And I went to work, set the bearing up, and put a shaft in it, and put the shims in the joint and everything, and melted the babbitt on their gas ring, and poured the bearing, and they watched me. They stood there, and they didn't know exactly how I was going to survive this thing, but when I got it done, they said, by golly, that's a good job, and if you want to come to work here, we got a job for you. You can start serving your apprenticeship.
Now that was one of the Corbett brothers, I presume.
One of the Corbetts. There was Fred Corbett and Art Corbett, and Dick Corbett. Dick ran the office. Fred sort of bossed the machine shop, and he did run the odd machine here and there, but Art was more of a machinist than anything else. And he indicated being a full-fledged machinist by wearing a bowler hat. That was his trademark. He ran the big milling machine, and he kind of guided my hands in many ways when he was sober. But he took off one time on a big toot and didn't come back for about 10 days. And in the meantime, there was a rush order standing by waiting for him to finish it. And I had to take over because the customer was really anxious to get this part. It was a spooler shaft for a big towing winch. And I set the milling machine up and used some notes that Art had left behind at the milling machine in the cabinet. I used that for getting the gearing on the differential indexing working. And I cut this spooler shaft and hand finished the end. A spooler shaft is it's like a fishing reel where the feeder goes back and forth on the drum. It goes back and forth, and there's a right-hand thread and a left-hand thread and a return bend at the end of each one. And these had to be hand cut, the end return end. I got it done, and it worked. I spent 827 hours at Corbett's. One of the jobs I had to do was fabricate a chimney for the Owen Sound Hospital. They had a little plate shop there with rolls, but we had no welding facilities, and this chimney had to be riveted. Should have welded.
That's quite a job.
And believe it or not, I crawled inside of a 15-inch diameter pipe and I bucked up the rivets with a slate
Of course, you were very slim then. You could do that.
I could do it. But my hearing has never been the same.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, they went broke. The padlock was put on the door, and I went down to Kennedy's, and I talked to them down there, and they immediately put me next to Dowsley Kennedy, and he was the president. And we had a nice conversation that day, and he ended up hiring me and explained the apprenticeship system that they had, which was pretty strict and not as well paying as Corbett's, but it sounded like it was more permanent. The deal was 10,000 hours in the total apprenticeship, 2,500 hours a year, 4 years. They would allow me the 827 hours that I already spent at Corbett's. And the first year I'd get 15 cents an hour, the second year 16, the third year 18, the fourth year 21. A $100 bond posted by a relative, which had turned out to be my uncle in Toronto, and $100 would be held back from my pay as the years went by. If you didn't complete your apprenticeship, you forfeited both the $100 bond and the holdback.
Well, now I'd like to interrupt you just for a moment before we get away from Corbett's completely, because you told me that they owed you money when you left, and no doubt other employees too.
I forgot about that.
But you did get straightened up.
Oh yes.
After a fashion.
Yes, I did. They paid in full at the rate of half of 1%. The bank sent me a check for 6 weeks' wages in the amount of 38 cents. How do you like that? I went to the movies on that.
I think you should have saved it and framed it.
I couldn't afford it. I couldn't afford to save it.
But anyway, you're an employee of Kennedy's now.
I am an employee of Kennedy's then, by this time,
and you were impressed with T.D. Kennedy.
Oh, he was a great man. I liked Mr. Kennedy, and right from the start, I think we got along as well as, I think we got along better than a lot of the people did with him. I had a motorcycle by this time. I bought the motorcycle when I was at Dunbar's, and that motorcycle had belonged to Fred Free, who was already working at Kennedy's, but he traded it in on a refrigerator. He was just married and needed the refrigerator more than he needed the motorcycle. Anyway, I ended up with the motorcycle. And I rode that motorcycle winter and summer, every day, for 7 years. And it was a good motorcycle. It was a Norton. 500 cc.
That's an English motorcycle.
English motorcycle, yeah.
Mhm.
It took me 3 years, 3 months, and 11 days to finish my apprenticeship. And largely because of the overtime that was brought on by the war. The war came on in 1939. I was into my apprenticeship a little over a year by the time the war started. And I worked for 9 months at one stage of the game, 9 months straight ahead, for 7 nights a week, from 6 o'clock at night till 7 o'clock in the morning. We never stopped those machines, even at midnight. We let them run right through anybody that had a machine that you could put a cut on, and it was running, keep it running.
And you ate on the fly.
Ate on the job. And
were there many did that?
yes, there was a lot of people did, a lot of boys did that. I wasn't the only apprentice, there was several others. But I think I was the only apprentice that worked steady nights, mainly because the man that was running opposite me had a problem at home, and he couldn't afford to be away from home at night. His wife was not well. So he worked 7 days a week as well, but I worked 7 nights. I saw men that fell asleep standing on their feet. They were standing there with their eyes open and they were sound asleep. I saw other guys fall over and hurt themselves badly. One chap hit his head on a block of iron and knocked himself cold. And there were a lot of accidents.
They were just exhausted.
Oh, they were just exhausted. And the thing was that we were young men, and you work 13 hours at night, and you got to take a little bit of time off during the day, and especially on a Saturday or a Sunday, you have to be up all day, and then come into work and work 13 hours more. You got to sleep sometime. But I lost 25 pounds. And other men were losing weight too, and somebody finally took notice and changed the whole program. It was ridiculous, just ridiculous. Thing was that the men were willing to do it. They knew there was a war on, and they gave their all. They gave everything they could. Now, we were losing young men too at this stage of the game because of the war. They were joining up and leaving. And we needed all the skilled help we could get. I remember we were getting some new machines in. We got a new 6-foot mill. We got a small 50-inch mill, boring mill, vertical boring mill. And then we got a key seeder, a new key seeder. And we needed more and more machinists, and Elmo King was one that came back. He had served his apprenticeship years before, and he was now a businessman in his own way. He had a trucker. He was hauling gravel in one truck. He had hauling contracts with the Sun-Times people, and he came back and started running some of the machines. Another old gentleman that had retired some years before, he was over 65, he came back, brought his toolbox in, went to work. Had another chap come in off the street one day, a French-Canadian hobo. He was a heck of a looking man. He had no teeth of any account, and his feet were out through the bottoms of his boots, and his pants were a heck of a mess. And said he wanted a job. He could run a lathe. He was a mechanic, machinist.
You were desperate for help.
He was having trouble getting across to us because he didn't speak English very well, you know.
But you give him a trial.
We gave him a job. I didn't, but somebody hired him. And I loaned him my tools, though. I had a few tools that I could loan him, and he went to work, and he demonstrated that he was a very, very good mechanic.
Just down on his luck.
He was out of luck, yes. He knew there was a war on, and he knew that he could get a job someplace, and he just happened to come along to our place. But he soon as he got his pay, he went out and bought clothing and bought shoes and bought tools and found a place to live, and he looked respectable, except he didn't get his teeth fixed. He was neglected his teeth very badly. However, he was on his way to work one night, walking along 2nd Avenue East down north of 14th Street. And he was walking on the right-hand side of this road, and a drunk came along in a car and sideswiped him, and the handle of the door went through his left arm and ripped it out of the shoulder. And the poor man was unable to ever work again. He got some kind of a settlement from the car driver. But it was the saddest thing. We lost him anyway, but we had to hire unskilled help. We were coming to some extent in conflict with Russell Brothers. Russell Brothers had moved into Owen Sound in 1937 or 38, and they were hiring people. They were into the war effort, the same as everybody else, and they needed machinists, machine operators, and welders. Now, Kennedy's didn't need welders at this stage. We weren't very heavily into welding. Any welding we did was minimal. Anyway, we had to have more men, and we had to have more buildings. As I said, we got some new machinery into the old machine shop, and we had to move it out of there because the foundry wanted to move in that area. They were being crowded with more and more work for the war effort and needed more space. So we had to get out of that, those buildings along 11th Street West. The East Machine Shop over by the CPR station, it was busy.
Was Elmer Gary the foreman over there?
Elmer Gary was the foreman over there.
He was in charge, right.
Jack Tennant was the foreman of the West Machine Shop. Just as the war started, Kennedy's hired a superintendent by the name of Harry Todd. Harry had been selling piston rings all over Canada, I guess, before that. He came back as a superintendent, and they needed somebody that had to be an overall coordinator for the work and so on. But anyway, we had to have a new building in order to move into, and structural steel was at a premium. The war was on, and everybody was building for the war effort. New buildings were going up all over Canada, and we didn't have a priority. But fortunately, we found a building in Montreal that was being used. It was owned by Canada Cement, and they got a company to come in and take it down, pulled all the rivets out of it, and loaded it on flat cars, shipped it to Owen Sound. They came along behind it and put it back together again on a foundation that was already prepared in advance. And it had cranes in it, and the cranes came with it. They were put up on the tracks, and as soon as that skeleton was up in the air, they started to move the machine tools into it. There was no floor. They poured a foundation in the sand, moved the boring mills, moved the drill presses in, and got out of the road of the foundry expansion. Well, one of the things I did, I followed this old boring mill that I had been operating on 11th Street. I moved with it out into this new building.
And you started production again?
We started production.
Even though the building wasn't completed?
No walls, no roof, no floor. Just rubber cab tires running along the columns hooked up to the motor, go. And we strung lights on it's the cord with some light bulbs on it. And I, along with 4,000 miller moths, went to work. The millers were swarming, and the mosquitoes. Anyway, we had to hire a guard. This guard paraded around this new building and around all the premises with a shotgun.
This was your security.
This was our security. We had no wire fences around the place, but we had a guard. And I remember one night, Mr. W. Kennedy put in an appearance late in the evening, and he was faced with his shotgun very quickly. And he told this guard who he was, and the guard said, sure. He said, I'm Santa Claus. He said, you get the heck out of here until you get a badge on you. If you haven't got a badge, you don't come in here. So he got out and he got his badge and he came back. Anyway, it became more and more clear that the war wasn't going to end quickly, and the foundry had to expand more. And they did. They went along 2nd Avenue West all the way down almost to 12th Street. They built a huge building, and they enlarged the cleaning room that they had for cleaning the castings. Wartime merchant shipping laid it on the line that we had to produce propellers, and we had to get producing very, very quickly. They were going to start building ships all over Canada and the United States at a great rate so we could transport material to England. And they needed not hundreds of ships, they needed thousands of ships. And we were going to make the propellers for them, both naval and wartime merchant shipping.
Is this when Fred MacDonald came into the picture?
Yes, Fred MacDonald came in as a federal employee, I expect, and he made it quite clear to W. Kennedy when and how much and what he was going to produce and how fast he was going to do it. And Fred MacDonald was going to help him do it, and he did.
A good man.
A good man. We got machinery, we got everything that was needed, and we got it in great quantity. It became obvious that the machine shop that we'd brought from Montreal wasn't nearly big enough and had to be extended to the north about another 160 feet, complete with overhead traveling cranes. And the one thing about this extension, we couldn't get steel. We had to build it out of wood, except for the craneways. The crane runways were steel. But everything else was wood. The walls were wood, the roof and everything else. The railroad stepped in and said, hey, we've got to have ball bearings on these trains. If we're going to go across Canada any faster, then we've got to quit using plain bearings and get into roller bearings. And you're going to make them. They were using steam locomotives, but the little wheels on the front of a steam locomotive are very small, and they travel they go 3 times the RPM of a driver. Mm-hmm. They're what keeps the locomotive, the train on the tracks.
They what they call the bogies?
Leading engine truck boxes.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
And they couldn't go any faster than those little wheels would run. The bearings wouldn't allow them to go any faster than what they could rotate. If they exceeded the speed limit, they would burn up. So we were suddenly making railroad axle boxes. This was on top of the propellers. This was on top of the anchor windlasses, the steering engines, everything else that came along. One of the things that we had to get into was centrifugal castings. It seemed like just one more thing, but actually it was quite a good development. First of all, it gave me an opportunity to travel for the company. They sent me down to Sandusky, Ohio. That was my first business trip for Kennedy's, and I spent a couple of weeks down there watching how they bored the tail shaft liners and the stern tube bushings and all of the rest of the tubular castings, how they poured the castings. I looked at the molding flasks that they had. I looked at the spinning machines that they used to spin these flasks. And after I'd been there a week, I got a hold of Kennedy's, and they sent my old friend, Walter Patterson, down. Walter Patterson was to be my guide for a long time.
What was his position with Kennedy at that time?
He was at that time sort of a tool designer. He looked after special projects, and if there was any, he was a draftsman, and he worked out of the engineering office. And my first acquaintance with him was in connection with this trip to Sandusky. And he came down to Sandusky and stayed about a week. The last week I was there, and we came home with our heads full of what we'd seen. I made some notes, as I have here, which had to guide us in the making of the casting machines and the boring heads, the boring equipment. First thing we did was go down to Chicago and buy a 40-foot long boring lathe.
Oh, that's a big machine.
A big lathe, yeah.
That's a big machine.
It came up to Owen Sound, and we installed it. The story behind the boring lathe was that it was shipped over to France during the First World War, just at the end of the First World War, and the ship was blown up on the shore somehow and was wrecked. And somebody went in and salvaged these lathes out of the hold of the ship and put them on the beach. And they sat there for a long time, and nobody wanted them. The war was over, so they shipped them back to the United States, and they stored them in Chicago, one on top of the other, piled them up, 40-foot lathes, weighing many tons each. And the one we wanted was on the bottom of the pile. And in that interval, between 1918 or 19 until 1940, the weight distorted the bed of the lathe. It was almost 3 feet wide and about 2 feet thick of solid cast iron, and that thing bent. Cast iron, it actually bent. When we put the thing in the shop, we thought we had a perfectly good lathe, and we looked at it with the level, and we couldn't. It was so crooked that we were just heartbroken. We thought that thing was, we got to buy another lathe. But as the weeks went by, that confounded lathe went right back into shape. It came back to it perfectly straight again.
You mean by itself?
By itself. It is the lesson I learned.
That can happen.
It can happen. Cast iron can distort, and it can return to its
It has a certain elasticity to it. Or how would you describe it?
Not that I ever knew, but it did.
But anyway, it happened.
It happened.
Well, that's marvelous.
And it happened again to me later years. The same thing happened to another machine that was distorted. And I had learned from the first experience that this would happen the second time, and it did. It was a lathe up at Heron Bay that had been anchored in the cement in a crooked manner, and when I released the cement from around the feet, the thing gradually came back to its original shape. So it can happen.
Well, that's amazing.
Now, I'm getting away from the subject, but as I told you, we were into the propeller making in a big way, and we were making 18-foot-6 propellers for the Liberty ships. And they weighed about 13 tons apiece. And each of the working propellers was bronze, and there was a spare cast iron propeller of the same diameter. Had to be bored the same, had to be key-seated the same, all the drilling was the same on both the cast iron and the bronze. Besides that, we made the propellers for the destroyers, the corvettes, the frigates, the Algerines, the Fairmiles, and these naval ships' propellers, they had to be pitch planed. The machining, the blades had to be machined.
Now this is different than anything you've been used to.
This is completely different than the merchant ships. The merchant ships, they required accuracy, but not to the extent that the Navy wanted. And we had to start from scratch and design and build machines that would machine the curved blades of a propeller. And you couldn't buy a machine like that. You can today. You can buy a computer-controlled machine that will give you any shape in the world, but at that time, the Navy wanted a true pitch propeller. That means that the pitch was the same in close to the hub as it is out near the tip of the blades. It was a constant pitch. And we built 3 such machines. One of them was for the destroyers, one for the Fairmiles, and one for the in-betweens. There was about an 8-foot, anywhere from 8 feet up to 10-foot-6 on this middle-sized machine. And we had to train operators to operate them. And we did.
No.
We kept them busy. But as a machinist, I had to help build these confounded machines.
No. The operators, because it was a repetitive job, operators could handle it once they were properly trained.
These propellers were repetitive. That's one good thing about them. Just something like axle boxes. They were the same today, tomorrow, and forever. But these Liberty ship propellers, the bores were all the same. And there was another group of propellers for the 4,700-ton freighters. And they were all the same, smaller than the 10,000 tonners, but they were the same. And for each size, we've made a special boring bar, and it would just do one taper, and that was it. They were all the same, and the operators could safely repeat the bores, and they all come out the same. Well, they could make a mistake if they tried, but generally they didn't. And the keyway cutting was of second importance, but it was quite important. Importance enough that we had to put a trained machinist, a journeyman machinist, on that job until we got a man trained who was reliable enough to be trusted to do that job and do it right. Because cutting the keyway crooked was just simply destroyed the wheel.
Well, that was fortunate because you were losing good men all the time, including machinists.
They were joining up.
Yeah.
And as soon as I got the last propeller pitch planer built and running, I joined up.
Well.
One thing about the Kennedy's machine shop, the machinists weren't allowed to join up unless they joined the Navy. The Navy said, you're either going to work for us here, if you want to work for us there, fine. But
that's why so many machinists went into the Navy.
That's why so many went in the Navy. They couldn't
Didn't
go
know that
anyplace else.
Didn't know that before. Oh well.
However, at the peak, I think Kennedy's war effort, and I believe the manpower got up to around 800 people.
It was Owen Sound's major industry over the years.
It was a major industry, and of that, about 225 to 275 were machine shop personnel. And of course, you got to remember that there was a big office staff, maintenance department, and a transportation and shipping gang, and as well as the foundry people to make up this 800 I'm talking about. And I mentioned the centrifugal casting machines, and I mentioned to you that we built an addition on the end of the building out of wood, and on the end of the addition we put another addition which had a boiler in it, a high pressure boiler, and we used that to pressure test all the anchor windlasses and the steering engines, and we ran them in, and the alternator engines, and they had to be run in and made to operate before they were shipped to the shipyard.
Oh, that entailed a lot of work then.
Yes. Then we also did a huge number of engine cylinders for the shipyards, Collingwood, and Port Arthur, Fort William. They were building corvettes, and they were steam engines, 4-cylinder, high, intermediate, and low pressure cylinders in each one, about 4 feet high. And each cylinder was a very complex molding job and casting job to get good castings. Anybody can make a lousy casting, but it takes a little know-how to make a really good casting repeatedly. And Kennedy's mastered that. It took them a while, but they got it. Each of these castings would weigh about a ton, and they were about 4 feet high. And very, very good job that the foundry did. The iron that they put in those castings was constant, and it was generally pretty good. They did another job in the foundry that it should be mentioned, and that was the molding and the casting of a bronze gun cradle called the Chicago piano. And it was a very, very complex bronze casting. We did some rough machining on those, but most of those castings went out in the rough state. Foundry, I would say, should get full marks for their efforts there. Now,
have you got to the point where you were in the Navy yet?
Well,
did you enjoy that?
No, I didn't enjoy it. I enjoyed doing what I was doing at Kennedy's. But,
how long were you in the Navy?
Oh, a couple of years. I went to basic training, of course, and I was sent down to Halifax for a while. And they found out that I came from Kennedy's, and they sent me over to Sydney, and promptly dumped me into a machine shop there in charge of one of the shifts.
You'd really been better off in Kennedy's.
Oh, far better off. $3 a day, for goodness sakes. $3.05 a day.
Yeah.
But anyway, it was an experience. I had chief petty officers working for me, and I had a commanding officer that gave me his liquor ration every month. He was a non-drinker. He made sure that I got time off to go and get a bottle for myself on his permit. He was a good man.
Well.
And anyway, when the war was over, I had enlisted for the Japanese Pacific War, and I got 58 days leave, and I was to be drafted under his command out to the West Coast, because he'd made that deal before I got my 58 days leave. And I come home, and Kennedy's heard I was home, and they promptly booked me to come to work quick. They had a big boring mill that was shipped in from the Citadel Merchandising, a 10-foot 6 Cincinnati Hypro. It was sitting in the yard, and it had to be installed. And, I had to take out a boring mill that I had operated before I joined up, and take it out, put it in the yard, and dynamite the foundation. because the new foundation had to be made deeper. And we drilled holes in the old concrete, put half a stick of dynamite here and a half stick there, and the dynamite man came along and set it off, and he didn't blow any holes in the roof, but he came awful close to it. But we got rid of the foundation. And I put
So
the new
you responded to the challenge then, did you?
Yeah,
You installed the new machine.
Installed
You were
it.
back as a Kennedy man.
that's right. I got her in and got her running. And, just before my 58 days leave was up, I took a trip up to Britannia Lodge. And on the way up, they dropped the atom bomb on Hiroshima, and the war was over. And I never went back.
Well.
I got noticed. I was drafted back to Toronto, and I got my discharge. I was out of the Navy about a month before anybody else that hadn't joined Pacific.
You're one of the fortunate ones.
I was one of the fortunate ones. Well, that was my experience in the Navy. And when I say I didn't enjoy it, I didn't dislike it all that much. But it did seem to be that I was doing more of a war effort where if I'd have stayed at Kennedy's, but I didn't know that until...
Of course, being young and getting around the country's an adventure.
Not to me it wasn't.
Wasn't. Lots of people looked at it that way.
I never thought of it that way. I
You
was
didn't.
getting all the trips I wanted out of Kennedy's. However, I came home and got married in 1946. And my wife, Ruth Kerr, was her last name.
She was a
Came
school
from
teacher.
Saskatchewan. She was a teacher. And we got married in October 1946. And we had an apartment for a while, and then we bought a cottage. And in January the 1st, 1949, our son was born.
Named after your father.
Named after my father. And I won a box of cigars for having the first baby in Grave County in that year.
Well, that's an accomplishment, I guess, but...
My wife got a box of chocolates.
Ah, dear.
But anyway, we bought a cottage down at Vanny Beach and developed it a bit, 100-foot lot. And we were getting along very nicely there, and we then had another second child, a daughter, a couple of years after my son, and we decided we needed a house. So we sold the cottage, and with the help of the VLA, I bought that place that we live on now, 394 2nd Avenue Southeast.
That was a good deal.
Yes, it was.
That was a good move.
It's a 3¼ acre property, and there's a bit of bush on it, and a beautiful place to raise children.
Yeah.
And I don't
It's
use
a
the
very
land all that much, but we have a
impressive
nice,
place.
nice garden every year. And the only thing about it, the children had to go to a country school. We were outside the city, and they walked up to that little school in what was then Tobyville, which is now Waverly Heights.
Yeah. They used to call that Dunn School. I think the old
Yes,
timers
I
called
think
it
it was
Dunn
Dunn.
School.
Anyway, the Korean War came along, and right after the fire. And Mr. Eberly came to me one day and he said, "You're going to England." And he said, "We're going to be manufacturing turbines, steam turbines for the Canadian government. They're going to start building some more destroyers, and we got to get in the business." So I went to England for a month and joined the W.H. Allen Company there. And
Where was this in England?
Bedford. They were in Bedford,
Where in the heck's Bedford?
north of London, not far.
Mm-hmm.
And I studied their manufacturing techniques and learned what machinery we'd have to acquire. And I came home and got the machinery brought up to Owen Sound, and I guess that I don't know how the thing was all financed, but we were given the go-ahead to get going, and we were making patterns and castings in the foundry, and everything was proceeding. And Mr. Eberly and I were called down to. We went to Ottawa.
Pardon me.
And we flew to Ottawa. And instead of 2 ships sets a year, they were going to build 6 ship sets a year. Program changed. And we had already hired a bunch of draftsmen, and we were drawing up jigs and fixtures for this program. We were having the jigs and fixtures made, and we had quite a pile of them already made. And it just came to us that this was beyond the capacity of Kennedy's. It was beyond the capacity of Owen Sound. There just wasn't enough manpower. There just wasn't enough shop space. There wasn't enough housing to house the people that would be needed for this program. And so we had to give it up. And it went from Owen Sound to Westinghouse down in Burlington. It was a great loss as far as I'm concerned, but there's no use of us struggling with it. We just couldn't.
Couldn't
handle it. But, we didn't have nearly enough of capacity. Now the machine shop may have lost a lot of the work, but the foundry didn't lose it all. The Westinghouse had to have castings, and they didn't make them. And Kennedy's kept on making castings for this Allen project. And we did some rough machining on them, but not a lot. Well, when the Allen project died, it became obvious that we had too much manpower in the tool design department, and they moved me out of there. I was in charge of the tool design. I was moved down to the machine shop as the superintendent, and an acting superintendent at first, and then.
Was Harry Todd there then?
No, Harry had died some years before.
Wow.
But there was a superintendent who had health problems and had to leave, and Jack Tennant he was pretty well incapacitated, and he left, retired. And I had a group of foremen. I had Glenn Morrison, Archie McIntyre, Norm Sutton, Mike Brabner, Walter Nicholson, George Pepperell, Norm Cameron, Earl Farley, George Rudolph. They were all foremen, various departments. The propeller repair and propeller making and propeller repair continued on, and it was strong. Tag Agnew was busy selling propellers all over the country.
I guess he traveled, as you say, all over the country.
All over Canada.
Yeah. And that was a break, because that gave him an opportunity that turned out good for him.
And it was a lucrative business, I'm sure. He kept on top of it, and it was well managed as far as I'm concerned. The Kennedys were also into a lot of other lines. They had strong connection with the F.L. Schmidt Company, who made cement mill machinery. And they manufactured cement, large kill rollers, huge steel rollers, about 4 foot in diameter, probably 30-inch face. You can imagine a big roller, 30 inches wide, 4 feet in diameter, with a big shaft through the center, about 15 inches in diameter, and a large bearing on each side of it, water cooled. Mm-hmm. And this roller supports a kiln, probably 20 feet in diameter. for making cement. And this kiln is 500 feet long.
Gracious.
And it's loaded with marl at one end, and it's fired from this end with a torch with a flame about 60 or 80 feet long. And by the time that marl moves from that end to this end, you got cement.
Well,
That's how cement is made.
well,
But
never heard that explained before either.
all these bearings and their bearing housings and the shafting and the rollers, it made a tremendous amount of work for the foundry and the machine shop, and it was good work, really good work. It was the steel rollers and the cast iron water-cooled bearings and the spherical self-aligning features that were in these things. It was just beautiful work. And the Falk Corporation was another string to the bow. We had a lot of connections with Falk Company and Falk Corporation in Milwaukee. We manufactured speed reducers. We cast the housings. We imported the gears from Milwaukee. We assembled and tested and ran these reducers in. We made them all different sizes for all different manner of customer. We were the agents for the Falk couplings, and we custom bored these and key-seated them and shipped them out daily. They were going out every day, hundreds of them. And besides all this, we were still turning out a heck of a lot of centrifugal cast tail shaft liners. We made tail shaft liners for Russell Brothers. We made them for all the shipyards. And besides that, we made steel tubes. And we sold them to various companies, Massey Harris, Rexnord, anybody that wanted a big, heavy-walled steel tube. It couldn't be made by the ordinary tube manufacturers. We could cast them, and we machined them. But there was a reduction in manpower as the time went on. We had to cut back. We had a tremendous staff for the war effort. And some of these specialized machines that we built for doing the propellers, they were all dismantled. A lot of them were dismantled and taken out. We were now getting away from the repetitive propeller business that had been on, and a lot of men returned from the services. Guys were being discharged from the Air Force, the Navy, and the Army. Mm-hmm. They were coming back, and the manpower that was there had to be laid off. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the people that came back found that the machine shops were a lot different than the one was that they left. The machinery was a lot different. But anyway, they managed to fit in. When I came back, the job that I had left was taken by another man, and I didn't ever go back to it. I was moved into the office. That's my move into the staff. And
maybe there's a good time when we should stop for a break.
That sounds like a good idea.
Yeah. Now, when did the fire occur, Elgin? Because that was a major event.
I think I rather skipped over the fire. It happened in February or Friday, May the 13th, 1950. And it was a terrible, terrible thing. It just about totally destroyed the machine shop. It did scrap some machine tools completely. They ended up in the scrapyard. For the most part, we salvaged, I would say, 95% of the machine tools, but we did have to rebuild the whole complete machine shop buildings. The steel work in the building was badly damaged. The columns remained intact, but the upper part of the roof had to be replaced. This fire started in that room that we called soundproof, air-conditioned, soundproofed room in which we finished the propellers. Finishing propellers, chipping, grinding, sanding, balancing, very, very noisy work, dirty, dusty, And in order to keep sanity in the machine shop, we had to soundproof that room and air condition it for the men that was working inside it. The exhaust system covered the buffing machines and exhausted all of the buffing material out through pipes into a cyclone outdoors. Fresh air was brought in. And one afternoon, this Friday the 13th of May, I suppose, nobody knows for sure, but it's assumed that somebody threw a cigarette butt into the exhaust system, and it went out into the cyclone, and it started a fire in that. And the fire worked its way back through the tubes and pipes within the soundproof room. The buffs on the buffing machines took fire. They exploded the buffing compound, which was hanging right over top of the buffing wheels. It spread all over the floor and simply exploded into a huge fire. And anything that was burned in there burned. The removable roof on this soundproof room burned for a long time before it burst into the machine shop. And by the time it burst out of that soundproof room, the fire was definitely out of control. And the heat was so intense that it set fire to the underside of the main shop roof, which was covered with insulation, fastened to a wood-sheeted roof, covered again by steel roofing. And the firemen were pouring water on a steel roof. No, it couldn't even touch the fire. So it was a disaster. The steel work expanded, 24-inch craneways, 24-inch I-beam craneways, buckled and bent just like presents. The end walls of the machine shop were pushed out about a foot with the expansion of the steel. All of the roof trusses were distorted out of beyond any hope of reclaiming them or repairing them. Fred McDonald was called in when the fire went out.
Had he retired in the meantime?
He had, I think, retired to some extent. I'm not sure whether he'd retired or not, but Fred had no intentions of ever retiring, I don't think. However, he came back and took charge of restoration of the building. I was given the job of recovering the machine tools and relocating them. Every machine tool had to be gone over very carefully for damage. A lot of we had 4 brand new machines. They weren't any more than about a month old. And I saw them blazing like 4 torches. And it was heartbreaking to see that. But it turned out that it was mostly the lacquer and the paint that was burning. It did destroy all plastic nameplates and knobs and control arms that were made of plastic. And these were all replaced quite simply. We had beams that fell on some of the machines and smashed them. Like the beams fell from the ceiling. The naval shop, as I said before, was largely wood. And these large wooden beams dropped quite a distance before they hit the small lathes and broke them right in two. But the one big, fairly good-sized boring mill got so hot at the base that the outer base, about 5 feet in diameter, expanded with the heat, and the inside journal on which the table rotated couldn't expand. It didn't get hot at all. And the result was that the ribs that connected the outside to the inside cracked from top to bottom. They were separated, and the whole base of the machine was destroyed. It had to be rebuilt completely. But most of the machines were recovered by putting new belts on them, new electric wiring, new hydraulic parts, and the motors rewound, and fresh oil, fresh paint, back in business. We moved a lot of those machines from the west, from the destroyed building on the west side over to the east machine shop. The machinery in the east machine shop was thrown out, made into junk.
Some of it, I'll bet you, had served in the First World War.
Indeed it had. Very old. But we scrapped it all, took down the line shafts that were there, and cleaned the building completely out, and moved in the machinery from the west machine shop. We set up a special arrangement of the axle box manufacturing tools, and we were turning out axle boxes again more efficiently and very quickly after the fire went out. Now, I think that takes care of the fire. It was a sad thing, and when the west machine shop was rebuilt, a great many of the machines that were moved over there were brought back to the west machine shop and reinstalled. There were some of the large machines that we couldn't move. We had to, again, operate them without any roof over them. But we did have a floor, and we did have walls, and we did have some crane service. Now, about this time, it came to the attention of Mr. Everly.
He was the general manager.
He was the general manager.
Mm-hmm.
At the machine shop and the foundry, he probably knew this for years, but he finally decided to do something about it. There was always a little jealousy, I think is the best word, between the foundry and the machine shop. I think when there was a little money to be spent on it, on improvements or equipment, it was a matter of who got the money, the foundry or the machine shop. And there was always that jealousy existed. The foundry boys never came into the machine shop, and the machine shop boys never went in the foundry. They just kept away from one another.
There was a constant sort of an undercurrent.
Just an undercurrent. Mind you, they'd go bowling together, things like that.
Would they? Oh, yeah.
No problem there.
But at work,
it was a...
they didn't work as a team as they should have.
That's it. That's about the size of it. It seemed to me that the foundry was selling castings to the machine shop at so much a pound, and anything went wrong in the machine shop, if they couldn't make a decent couldn't get a decent finished product, they'd blame the foundry. The metal was too hard. There was too much metal to machine off. There were discontinuities in the casting that shouldn't have been there, and this sort of thing. And it was constant bickering is a better word. And nobody seemed to be listening to the other one. And everybody said, this has got to stop. He called in Mel Nickel, who was a foundry man, and he called me in and laid it on the line. He said, from here on, you boys are going to cooperate.
Or else.
Or else. And cooperate we did.
It's too bad it hadn't happened earlier.
Oh, it should have happened 50 years before. Mainly, one of the big complaints was that we didn't tell the foundry what was wrong until after the fact. It should have been discovered right at the start, especially where there was a repetitive order. They made it'd make a dozen castings, and every one of those dozen castings would have a fault in it. And nobody would say anything. They'd go on, live with it. And if they did say something about it, you wouldn't find out until another dozen castings were made. So it developed that we had to make sample castings.
This was costing the firm a lot of money.
Yeah, sakes. We had to make sample castings, and we had to machine these samples and then find fault at that stage and correct it. Correct it. Right then. don't make 100 castings and then start correcting. And it was very successful. Mel Nickel and I worked together very closely, and it developed that the foundry superintendent and I got along a lot better. We cut down the amount of machining required. I know the foundry weren't able to sell as many pounds of castings after that as they had previously, but we were able to get the machining done ever so much more quickly.
Well, that was
Along about that time, I was sent up to Sault Ste. Marie to look at a business that they were thinking of buying. Northern Foundry had a pump. They made pumps, and they made other equipment for the pulp and paper industry. It sort of fitted Kennedy's line of work. Northern Foundry had a foundry that made castings. They bought some outside castings. But anyway, their machinery was pretty old and inefficient, and they were thinking of selling out. They did have a good line of pumps, so the patterns for them were adequate. They weren't great, but they were adequate. They had drawings, which were again quite adequate. They had an engineering staff that was really very good. Doug Young and Norman King came down from the Sioux when we bought the business and stayed with us for years. We developed a pump testing station. We had bought Corbett's old buildings, Corbett Foundry buildings, and turned it into a plate shop. And as time went by, with the added fabricating equipment that we bought, we had to have more space, so we added quite a large addition to the end of the building, and I would say we tripled the size of the floor space. And in that new building, we added the pump testing tank, motors, and all the controls.
now this would be in the early 50s probably.
Yeah, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
And this made a lot of work for us. Along with the pumps, we got an order from the uranium fields to manufacture some drum-type filters. And we manufactured 2 or 3 of those with the Northern Foundry design. This wasn't something new to us. We had already made several whiting washers, they called them. They were a drum-type filter. They were different, but they were in some respects the same. The whiting washers were all metal, whereas the Northern filters had were quite a bit of steel in them, but they were covered with wood, and it had to be turned. Anyway, this was all helping to fill up our new fabricating shop. Another line of work that we took on was a valve, a bunch of valves. We made up a connection with S. Morgan Smith in York, Pennsylvania. They manufactured pipeline valves, great big suckers that handled pipe 4 feet in diameter and pressures of 1,000 pounds or more. Plug type valves, butterfly valves, and we made the castings, we machined them, and we assembled them and shipped them. One big butterfly valve I can think of at the moment was an 8-foot diameter valve that we put together for the Metropolitan Toronto Water Board. It now lays in the bottom of Lake Ontario at the inlet to an 8-foot diameter pipe that runs into Toronto. And it's remotely controlled from the shore.
Wow. Wow. Mm-hmm. Now, before we get away from that age, and we'll soon be into the stage where Hadmill became involved.
Oh, yeah.
But there were a number of people that you told me that you had a great respect
yes,
for.
yes.
Some of those,
Sorry, I didn't mention that
Yeah.
before, but those
besides
Mr.
T.D.
Eberly,
Kennedy and Mr. Eberly.
besides Mr. Eberly and Owsley Kennedy, there was Art Nickel, and Miss Bellamy, and Jack Buck, and Jim Keon, and Walter Patterson. Walter Patterson was in charge of the tool development, and he did a lot of work in the drawing office under Jack Buck. But as the years went by, Walter took over a special department, strictly tool design.
Mm-hmm. And what did Art Nickel do, Elgin?
Art was, he was, I would say, in the finances.
Was he?
Not
Was
mistaken.
it? Was it? But he was one of the key figures too.
Yes, he was a key man. There's no doubt about that.
Mm-hmm. So we've arrived pretty much at the time when Hadmill became interested.
Well,
it was Hadmill.
Before that, I would think that
Oh.
I should mention that we got into the business with Cooper Bessemer. They were a
Oh,
large,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
a large manufacturer in Brantford, and they manufactured big V-type engine, V12 engines. These were enormous engines. They used to pump the gas from the Western Canada all the way down here. They burned gas right out of
At these
booster engines.
booster stations. Mm-hmm.
And we made this and cast and machined the cylinders and the cylinder heads and some flywheels for those engines. It was nice work.
Wow,
Very nice work.
Mm-hmm.
And we enjoyed working with them. Now, all this time, TAC was still calling on the shipyards and promoting propeller sales, and with a lot of success.
Mm-hmm.
Now, these new propellers didn't have to be pitch-planed anymore, and we managed to get rid of all the old pitch-planers that we had during the war. But TAC was finding competition pretty strong from Europe and from the UK. He was finding out that those people could manufacture and ship a propeller and land it on the dock over there in Collingwood cheaper than Kennedy's could do it from Owen Sound.
Was that because of cheap labor or better methods?
No, it wasn't cheap labor, I wouldn't think. I think it was just our methods and our materials were falling behind, and we weren't updating the equipment. And the people that were at Kennedy's, the Hadmill people that had bought Kennedy's, weren't interested in promoting anything but paper-making machinery. And that same thing is true of Black Clausen, who later bought Hadmill out. They weren't interested in promoting.
They just had a different concept altogether.
They did. As I said before, they were almost like a one-string banjo. They didn't want to be bothered with Falk Corporation. They didn't want to be bothered with propellers.
And yet these were firms.
They were making money.
That's right. They were a tremendous help that you'd established good relationships with. It was unfortunate. Now, at the time, I guess it looked promising, but it didn't pan out all that well over the years.
Kennedy's, one other thing that Kennedy's did, they developed a line of dryer gears. You know, paper machines over the years were a noisy dang thing. Gears were all cast iron, and they rumbled and roared, and the noise level was terrible in a paper-making machine. And there were hundreds of paper machines rumbling away all over the country, and then Kennedy's developed a fiber gear.
Pardon me.
This fiber gear, it was a steel spider with fiber teeth. The teeth were cut on the outside of the gear in fiber. And one of these fiber gears would be inserted between two iron gears. And the noise level dropped off enormously. and they were selling those things like hotcakes. And they came along with another design of a bearing, oil ring type bearing that didn't leak. Paper making machinery, the bearings on those machines are notoriously bad for leaks. And you can't have leaks around paper. Oil gets on the paper, it's messed up. You waste a lot of the paper getting rid of oil leaks. They developed those and they sold a lot of those. And this was all good work. Now, I think that I said that Black Clausen and were not interested in a lot of the propeller work that was going on. And as I told you, it become a little bit less economically profitable. So TAC, I think, got the idea that if Black Clausen wouldn't modernize and wouldn't update the foundry melting procedures and so on, he would get out. And he made a connection with Stone Manganese Marine in England, and he they located a building down there that had been used to make tombstones. The Rock of Ages, I believe, was the name of the company.
Mm-hmm.
And they had been, I guess, put out of business by the unions. I'm not sure about that, but it seems to me they got a little fed up with labor relations, and they also were having some problem with granite coming from Quebec. So they just pulled all the machinery out and went down to Vermont, closed the building up, and finally it was left in the hands of the city of Iberville. And it was from them that Stone Manganese Marine bought the building. And TAC went in there and started with a couple of employees from Owen Sound. They got Ed Hoey and Harold Curry to go down. They joined them and they started in repairing propellers. TAC hustled around, got a bunch of tools for them, and got the propellers coming in. And I decided that if TAC could do it, I could do it. I was a little...
Well, you had some encouragement from TAC because he thought highly of you.
Well, I don't know about that, but...
Well, he told me you did. You did.
I know this much, that I wasn't taken too much with Black Clausen's attitude. They weren't interested in maintaining the integrity that Kennedys had all their lives. Black Clausen wanted quantity, not necessarily quality every time. They'd like to have had quality, but they weren't getting it, and they knew it. And they brought in a bunch of machinery from the States that they didn't want anymore in the States, and sent them up here to Owen Sound. Anyway, their pattern equipment wasn't great. They abandoned a lot of the lines that we had developed. We were manufacturing a great many of the parts for the Bauer refiner, and this was a well-received machine in the paper industry. Stainless steel castings were being made for it and machined. The Morden Stockmaker was a line of stock-making equipment that we had developed way back in about 1946, and had manufactured the machine in its entirety, complete, and sold all over Canada. And these machines were in competition to Black Clausen, so they were dropped. And we had a lot of jigs and fixtures and things that were made especially for those. manufacture those machines. But anyway, I went to Quebec, and when I got there, they didn't have any machine tools of any account. They had nothing, as a matter of fact, except to repair benches and a few torches and sledgehammers, and they were polishing and repairing propellers. In fact, one of the first things they did was send me off to England to visit the people over there. They had plants in France, they had plants in Brazil, they had several plants in England. They were an international company. They had another plant over in Singapore. They knew what they were doing, and they specialized in propellers, and they did it right, believe me. I studied their furnaces and their machining facilities. Came home and they shipped over boring machines and a brand new key seating machine, the largest key seater I ever saw. It would key seat a propeller hub 5 feet long with a keyway 5 inches wide. It was enormous. But we had to put in a special foundation for it, and they sent over a Holroyd propeller boring and facing machine. Had to build a foundation for that, get it installed. I had to start with drawings and get castings, patterns and made, to get castings made, and built a furnace, 10-ton furnace, and scored an order for 5 propeller sets of destroyer wheels. And these had to be manufactured to the same standards as the ones that Kennedy's had been making, 5-bladed destroyer wheels. The government owned all of the templates and template holders and so forth that were used in the manufacture. And
they were still up here in Kennedy's, though.
They were still here at Owen Sound, and we wanted them. Government also owned some of the melting equipment. But Kennedy's wouldn't send that. They bought that from the government. They did send the templates down, and I had to get busy and design a template holding machine and get that built.
Seemed a little bit like sour grapes in a way, didn't it?
At the same time, I had to get the furnaces all built and the ladles. Get the ladles all rigged up, and the molding pit had to be made. We started with nothing, and we had to build everything from the ground up. And it was a man.
But you did. You received every cooperation from the UK headquarters. They were cooperative, apparently.
Yes, they were. They sent a man over, in fact, at the start. He had his methods, and we had ours. It was a little conflict of interest, a little thing to change him over to our way of thinking. We wanted to use the propeller blade pattern in its entirety, but he had another method, what they used, called the sweep. I won't try to describe those two methods. They're just completely different. Our method was quicker, I believe, and he did finally agree to adopt it, and we did. We were quite successful. We made the propellers, and we never lost one.
But at least your equipment was modern and up to date.
Yep, it was.
That was one great
Every
thing.
respect.
So you had a good product, and you turned out very satisfactory propellers.
We were quite busy. We were doing a lot of repair work, and we were machining a lot of propellers of all sizes, and every one of these from Quebec.
That's good.
I think that about covers the Canadian Stone Marine. It's still in operation, and it's very successful. They since bought $1 million computer-controlled, microprocessor-controlled milling machine for machining blades, which takes the place of the old pitch planing machines that we had at Kennedy's, and they're going strong, as far as I know. I haven't been down lately.
Well, you had a chance to come back to Owen Sound.
Well, before I leave Quebec, I want to mention one thing that isn't generally known. Propellers come in different makes. Until now, I've never mentioned controllable pitch propellers. Now, this is a propeller.
This is new.
Reasonably new. They're being used to a great extent now, especially with diesel engines. The advent of diesels has brought on a controllable pitch propeller. They're used on tugs. They're even used on icebreakers. And they're used to a great extent on these package freighters, not package freighters, but container ships.
Mm-hmm.
Container ships. They don't require a reversing gear. The engine doesn't have to be reversed, and you do not overload your engine. One of the killers of the diesel engine is overload.
Mm-hmm.
And the way it is with a controllable pitch propeller, the exhaust temperatures are measured constantly. And if the engine gets the least bit too hot, the pitch of the propeller is reduced to maintain the exact load required to load that engine 80%.
Well,
No more. A tug pulling a boom of logs, or he's going to get the boom, so he jumps in his tug and propeller goes into full pitch, and he goes like the mischief to get this thing. When he gets there, he hooks onto the boom, turns around, and the pitch is automatically controlled.
That's amazing.
It can only go as fast as that engine has horsepower to produce 80%.
Wow,
So
wow.
and it's taken care of automatically.
That's marvelous.
And the propeller blades will rotate from full ahead to full reverse. And there's a panic button. If a tug was going head on or to some kind of a stone or something in the water, he could push the panic button and the propeller would go into full reverse, and it would stay there till the engine got up to 80%, and then it would come back. And if he was going to hit that rock again, he'd push the panic button. It would go full, load the engine 100% three times only.
Well.
And after that, if he's going to hit, he's going to hit.
Well. Now, did they have this at Kennedy's?
No.
They
No,
didn't.
they didn't.
But you did have down at
We did down there, and we
that was the late 60s now.
We built four. We made the castings and machined them and shipped them to Vancouver, where our associate company, Osborne Propellers Limited, assembled them and tested them.
Oh, wow.
Now, I think that concludes the story on Canadian Stone Marine. I know
You and Elgin were traveling back, or you and Tack were traveling back and forth.
Yes, we had to go back and forth. Our wives were still in Owen Sound. Our homes were still in Owen Sound. And
That wasn't,
468 miles is a long way to come home from work.
I guess so.
We made the trip every weekend, back and forth. Tack finally was offered the job of industrial commissioner here in Owen Sound, and he accepted. And he had put the company on a paying basis, and I guess he figured his job was done. And I think that he was glad to get back to Owen Sound, where his wife and family were. And I stayed on for a while and looked after things until they got a man over from England to take over the business. And wasn't long after he arrived that I submitted my resignation. My wife was a good friend of my brother's wife. She had polio, and My wife,
Mac's wife was Muriel Clark.
Muriel
A,
Clark.
a very, very nice, pleasant girl.
Yes, indeed.
Yes, she was.
But the polio crippled her pretty badly.
Terrible.
She spent a lot of time in the hospital, and when she came out of the hospital for a while, she was able to walk, and that's about all. She had to be cared for very extensively.
Mm-hmm.
And my wife was the only person who would take her out of the hospital and put her in the car and take her for a ride and take her to our home and give her a meal and entertain her for a day or more.
Yeah,
but she had to be taken back.
Ruth was wonderful. There's no two ways about that.
Yes, it was.
But
They were good friends. They were friends before I even met my wife.
Muriel was very pleasant. Even after the tragedy of the polio, she never lost her good spirits or sense of humor, and always pleasant. Great to visit with.
And as long as Muriel was sick, my wife wouldn't leave her to come to Quebec with me. So I decided after about 4 years that I'd had enough, and decided that I would come back. I got an offer from Dick Workington at Russell Brothers that I couldn't refuse. So in 1972, I came back home as a plant superintendent for Russell Brothers. Now, they were modernizing. Now, Dick Workington was a very, very forward-looking gentleman. He believed in modernizing. He believed in making special equipment where it was cost-effective. He wouldn't think twice about making a decent fixture or jig or welding positioner if it could be shown that it would pay off, and usually they did.
Mm-hmm.
He modernized all the welding facilities. They got away from the stick electrode pretty well. They were using continuous wire feed welding equipment of all sorts.
That would really speed things up too.
Where a man normally would weld maybe 12, 15 pounds of weld in a day, he could weld 60 or more pounds in a day.
Amazing. Wow. Mm-hmm.
And without any extra effort. He threw out the old junky machines that they had and bought some new horizontal boring mills. When I went there, they already had a brand new 63-inch vertical boring mill and a brand new 4-inch bar horizontal boring mill. And they then got busy and built a new building. They built a huge building to the south end of the property, towards the south end of the property, and immediately bought an enormous horizontal boring. And then he bought a big radial drill, a 6-foot radial drill, beautiful machine. And he got he already had a fairly good plate shear. It was almost new. I think it was new probably 3 years before I went there, 3 or 4 years. It would cut a 1-inch thick plate 20 feet long.
Isn't that amazing?
The biggest shear north of Toronto, I would say. There might have been one later in Guelph, but I think for years it was the largest one.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a very large press brake to go with it. They manufactured a lot of lamp standards, and they were in the business of making frames for Bomag compactors and all kinds of log skidders. They made them for Timberjack, they made them for Clark equipment, and
they pretty much got away from they pretty much got away from the boat business.
yes.
That had been their specialty of
I was
Russell
there
Brothers
11 years,
originally.
and they only built one boat in the 11 years that I was there.
Well,
It was a Dozier boat, used for, it had a bulldozer blade across the bow, very powerful boat, not large, maybe 20 feet long, and this bulldozer blade would be just like a bulldozer pushing logs around the boom, out of the boom. And we were, they also bought a second multi-torch machine. And it was computer controlled. The first machine they had would follow a template. It had an electric eye that would follow a template and cut the plate. But this new machine ran off a tape control computer. We bought new plate rolls. The old plate rolls they had were obsolete. And we were heavily into the manufacture of parts for Euclid. Euclid is a manufacturer of very heavy trucks and construction equipment. They come from Cleveland, Ohio, and they bought a plant in Guelph. And they had orders for 75-ton trucks. And one of the biggest parts of that job was the manufacture of the frame. And we took that on. These frames were huge. That's all I can say. They were huge. And they were later upgraded, I believe, to 85 tons with heavier side members and everything. And we made hundreds of those frames for them. And along the way, we bought our own trucks. We had 3 trailers and a Peterbilt tractor, and our own driver, and we hauled frames to Clark, hauled frames to Bomag. We'd bring back plate from the suppliers of plate, and those 3 trailers were loaded, going all the time. And Bomag bought front and rear frames from Russell Brothers. We fabricated them in their entirety. We machined them completely. And all Bomag had to do was throw the engine in and put on the wheels. We made the wheels for them too. You've seen these large machines on the highways compacting the road bed. They're used extensively on the landfill sites, compacting garbage and moving them around. The blades, the dozer blade across the front to push the garbage into place and cover, so on. They also did some work for a big company in Guelph called Rexnord. They made stone crushers. We did a lot of work for them. We did a lot of parts for Jarvis Clark. People that make scoop trams underground in the mines. We fabricated and fully machined frames for them. All this, I imagine, got the, also, and one more thing I should mention. We made some 50-ton ladles for Inco, 50-ton capacity. They didn't weigh 50 tons. They would hold 50 tons of nickel. And those flasks, those ladles, were all radiographed. The welds were radiographed almost 100%. You could just imagine what would happen if a failure in any of the welds, a ladle with 50 tons of metal in it. So they were good. They were happy with them. All those workers at Russell's were a very, very serious bunch of men, and they did their job well. Dick Orkington was a good leader. He insisted on quality. He insisted on integrity of the products. And,
well, had he been at Kennedy's at one time?
Yeah, strangely enough, he worked for me in the tool design office.
I thought
No,
he'd
he was
been
in
at
college.
Kennedy's,
What
but
did-
but his father was a veteran of Russell Brothers.
Oh, yes, he was
yeah.
there.
Yeah, I believe he was a naval architect or something. The father. They said he was a very capable man.
Well, he was his father ran the place, I guess, for a long time.
Hmm.
But
But the years sort of caught up with you eventually. Came retirement time,
well,
and I'll bet you're. Well, you'd have mixed emotions at best, Elgin. Isn't that true about retirement? You enjoyed your work.
I sure did. I
Yeah.
really enjoyed my work. There was
Yeah.
never anything that ever crossed my path that would have enticed me out of that kind of work. I enjoyed the I don't know this. Without the smell of a machine shop, I was lost. But the men that worked at Russell's, as I said, were a serious bunch, and they had a planning department that was minimal in size, but they really did their job. The thing that impressed me was the way that they'd bring in a job, and they'd have the cards all issued to the shop. The plate would be brought in, the right plate would be brought in from the yard, planted down in the torch cutting machines, and the parts were cut, and they'd be taken away and stored. And then a day or so later, they'd land on the bench in front of a fabricator, and he would assemble and tack the thing together, and it would go to a welder and be fully welded. No fuss, no mistakes. It seemed to be just natural.
Well, of course, this had to indicate good planning and management.
That was the secret.
Sure.
They had it.
And if people didn't fit into that scheme of things, they weren't going to be there.
They didn't have that kind of success at Kennedy's, I don't think, or at Black Clawson. Ever.
Well, it's too, because working conditions are so much nicer under under that sort of state of affairs.
You're right. Anyway, the work that we were doing was very attractive to people like Packard. Now, Packard was a Pacific Car and Foundry in Seattle, Washington.
It's a
Actually,
big
it's
outfit.
in Bellevue, Washington, not Seattle. It's across the river from Seattle. But anyway, they were a very large corporation. They owned Peterbilt, Kenworth, International Car and Foundry down in Kenton, Ohio, Pacific Car and Foundry out in West Coast, Seattle, and Gearmatic was another place in Surrey, BC, and Braden Winch Company down in the States, Wagner Mining Equipment in Portland, Oregon. That's just to name a few of them anyway. And they bought Russell Brothers, and Dick remained on as a president or manager.
But this turned out to be something like the Black Clawson thing.
Yes, yes.
They seemingly had a different concept.
The difference was that they encouraged us to continue with our lines of work with Bomag and Clark Equipment and Caterpillar and all these extra strings. This was just one more string to our bow, as far as I could see.
Mm-hmm.
They Packard people wanted us to also become involved with the Portland company, Wagner mining machinery in Portland, Oregon. So we went down there, Dick and myself and another chap. We went down and visited there for a few days and took pictures and looked at their handling facilities and their machining facilities, and it was pretty obvious that this was old hat as far as we were concerned. We'd done all this with Jarvis Clark, and only I think we had a better way of doing it than they did, than they had in Portland. We came home and we very successfully manufactured the Wagner machines and assembled them, put the engines in them, we tested them. We shipped them all over the place, and we Some of them even went to Peru, up in the mountains. They had, some of them had air-cooled engines, some of them were water-cooled, some of them had water-cooled exhausts. You know, you couldn't dare let a spark loose in a coal mine, or you'd have an explosion. The special options on various machines. The Gearmatic company in Surrey at that time were shipping an awful lot of their winches down to Ontario, to Caterpillar and places that were making log skidders. And you know, the bulldozers have a big winch on the back end of them to pull things out of trouble or pull themselves out of trouble. And these winches were mechanical. And they decided that rather than have a lot of the castings shipped from the east of Canada out to Vancouver to be machined and shipped back down to the east again, that they would be far better off to manufacture them here in the east. And that's what they did. They sent the machinery down here that they had developed, and we installed them and started to manufacture the Gearmatic winch, mechanical winch. And we set up a conveyor system in a good area, and they brought a man down from Gearmatic to show us how to do it, and we were very successful at that. I think that once that got assembled, I had reached retirement age, and I decided that I was going to retire very shortly, and Dick hadn't made a move up until then to get a new man, but he did. And after he came, I stayed another year while he got his feet on the ground, and then I did retire in April, and Dick retired in May.
Well, wow, very shortly after.
Yeah.
So that ended your association there.
That ended the
But we still have a bit to talk about retirement.
Well,
So we're going to start another tape. So it'll take as long as required.
You run out of tape.
Well, we're close to it. Now there's one thing, Elgin, that I think it'd be nice to mention, because I thought this was a little different. Now this concerns your wife, Ruth. She was prevailed upon to return to her teaching career at one stage, even though she had a young family, and she told them that she was tied down because of the family. But Stan was at school, but Jane was just a little girl.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Well, as a teacher at Woodford, she was just slightly pregnant, and decided that she couldn't teach anymore. And Ruth was asked if she'd go and stand in for her for a while. But it developed into something fairly permanent. One time, after she got going there, she was taking the family car out to Woodford to teach, and she had the car parked in the driveway at the school. There was a big gravel truck came along, decided he had to turn around and go the opposite direction. So he pulled in behind the Oldsmobile and he stopped. He couldn't find the reverse gear. Every time he took the truck in gear, he hit the back end of the Oldsmobile. Finally, he drove the Oldsmobile right through the gate into the schoolyard. And there was the kids ran into the school and called my wife. She came out and said, "What are you doing?" He says, "I ain't going to talk to you. Get your husband out here." So finally he found the reverse gear, but there was a man across the road, I think he was the Department of Highway man, had a radio in his car, and he was getting his gas tank filled up. And he phoned the police on his radio phone. After the truck drove away, the police came and asked a few questions, looked at the car, the damage, and took off down the road. He found the guy up against the fence, sound asleep. But the car was damaged and had to fix it. The other thing that happened was that one night she was coming from school, and she got to Hatton's Hall corner. And in those days, you didn't have to stop your car when you were meeting a school bus. You weren't allowed to pass it, but you could go the other way. But anyway, she saw the school bus stopped at Hatton's Hall, and there were two children got out off the bus, and she was slowing down. The bus pulled ahead, and she saw the children standing there, and she was fairly slow. And all of a sudden, one of the kids took the notion to run across the road in front of the car. And when that happened, Ruth put the brakes on, but she was on gravel that had been pulled out of the side road onto the pavement. And it was just like a pair of skates. She was sliding on gravel stones on top of pavement. And she hit the boy, broke his leg, knocked him unconscious. And the people came running out of the houses and gathered the boy up and threw him in the back of the Oldsmobile, said, "Get him to the hospital, quick as you can." And he was unconscious. So she took off. She got down to the corner of 10th Street and 2nd Avenue, and the boy had regained consciousness. And he started to scream, and he was going to get out of the car right there, and there was a policeman on the corner. And Ruth called the policeman and told him what was happening. "Would you please stay with the boy and to the hospital?" "Oh no," he said, "I'm going to be picked up here in a few minutes by the car." He said, "I can't leave my station." So Ruth went on to the hospital and got the boy into the emergency. And she was still with him when the police arrived. And they charged her with leaving the scene of an accident. They charged her with careless driving. They charged her with everything under the sun that they could think of. And the thing went to court. I had motor league protection. And they fought the case, and she was convicted. And they said, "No, that's ridiculous. We're going to appeal it." So they appealed it, and they upheld the conviction. And she had paid a fine of, I forget, $50 or something. The court returned her check. They returned my bond that I had to post for the appeal. They never put a mark on her license. And Corporal J.R. Brown said she never should have been convicted in the first place. It was ridiculous. She had done everything she could to avoid that accident.
Well, she had her experiences.
However,
So,
that's it.
so now you're in retirement. And what do you do with yourself? What did you do with yourself when you retired first? That's the question. That's the hard part. The immediate retirement. After a while, you fit into a schedule.
Right off the bat, when you're retired, you never know when your holidays start. How sweet it is.
Yeah.
But anyway, I did have more time to play golf, and more time to work in the garden. I might do a little repair work around the house. I even started to play some pool and read books. Things I've always wanted to do is read some books. I read about 4 of them a month. But I had so much free time that winter time and in the evenings I thought I better buy some machinery, machine shop equipment. I kind of missed being away from it. So I bought an engine lathe and a bench grinder and small tools, and I got a workbench put together in the basement and decided I could repair and put near anything from at all, just anything at all. Bring it on. But anyway, the first job I got was my wife's can opener, and I went to work on that, but we ended up buying a new one.
You wouldn't call that job a success,
No, it
then?
wasn't a success. But it got better as time went on. I even got a captain's chair in the basement I could sit down on. Something I always wanted in a machine shop was a chair to sit on. But anyway, retirement can get boring. And you're always looking for something different. And one day I got a phone call from the Georgian College trainer. Pat's the father. I can't think of his son's name. trainer.
I'm not familiar with them there.
I was interested in teaching a class
That makes the noise.
of teaching a class of millwrights. And I said, well, is it on a permanent basis? He said, well, we want you to finish out the year. He said, there's been a problem. The teacher we had has been taken off our list. We want you to finish the course.
Now, was this in the daytime or evenings?
It was evenings. Evening
Mhm.
class. Well, I finished that seminar, if you want to call it that, and they invited me back the following year.
No, but you enjoyed it.
I did.
Sure.
I did enjoy it. They had a nice machine shop there, and it was some classroom work, and I prepared some tests for them, and I became a teacher. And I enjoyed it very much. But after those two courses were finished, I was invited to run a couple of classes over at Monroe in measuring instruments. They had inspectors over there that were called on to inspect both in metric and in inch measurement. And they had inspectors on the job that didn't know how to read either one of them. But anyway, it's over with, he says.
We're having sound trouble. Something's cutting out. Like,
Is
it's
it?
just getting.
Is Elgin's or mine?
Oh, I don't know. I can't even tell on the way both these meters work. I can't even tell which one you're on. But that pen makes a noise too.
No, I don't see anything on here.
I'm not saying,
Nothing's counting.
it should be counting. There's a thing that says counter. Press it. Second button from the end. Sometimes.
You want us to put a date on this?
Now, this is Saturday afternoon, October the 11th of '97, and I've taken a leaf out of your book, Elgin. And for the viewers, I want to say it's my pleasure to be in the home of Elgin and Ruth Walter for the wrap-up of this part of our videotape regarding the history of William Kennedy and Sons, and particularly Elgin Walter's life story. So we had a very good session a few weeks ago, and now we're back at it, and we ran out of time last time, Elgin, but we have hopefully enough time to give you whatever is required to tell us about your retirement.
Well, one thing about it, Jack, we're all running out of time.
That's true, but some of us are more fortunate than others. And you're fortunate. None of us know when we go into retirement. It's an unknown, uncharted grounds for most of us. But I think we can both say we've been very fortunate. But you've had some rather amazing experiences that you never could have anticipated.
Yes, I agree with you, Jack. But there's one thing I wanted to bring up at this point. Since we had that other session, I had a phone call from Meaford, from a fellow by the name of Phil Short.
Mm-hmm.
And because, he said, I was the last Corbett employee, and probably the only one still alive, he contacted me and said that he said, did you know that Corbett's made gasoline engines? And I said, no, I didn't know that. But I said, I knew they made net lifters, and I knew that they had to have a small gasoline engine to drive them. Mm-hmm. Well, he said, that's where this engine came from, off a fish tug. And he said that if I'd like to see it, I could come over. And so I contacted you, and together we went over, and you did videotape that little engine.
We've got this on videotape, and we want to include that. Because
That-
that really is a small piece of history right there.
Yes, it was. It's and
And he was a very nice chap. He was most accommodating.
he's going to rebuild the engine, and it'll be in running order before long, and maybe later we could get a picture of it running, if you so desired. But I'm sure he'll make it run. And incidentally, he followed up on our conversation and visited an old Russell Brothers employee, a friend of mine, Ivan Fairweather, and he ended up increasing his engine collection by 3 engines, which he bought from Ivan, and moved them to Meaford.
He has quite a collection there.
He has quite a collection. But you wanted to talk about my retirement.
Yeah, that's
Well, here we are.
Main
I'm now sitting in my retirement high chair, and I've been spending a lot of time here. And I did a lot of thinking about this interview. And I made a few notes. And I'd like to start off by saying how sweet it is to be retired.
We're among the fortunate one, Elgin.
Yes, I am one
Very
of the
fortunate.
I've now been retired since 1983, and they've all been, those years have been happy. They've been good. And as you say, there are a lot of people that aren't as lucky. One of the things that people have to face when they retire is what they're going to do. And they look for a hobby. Some of them hadn't thought about it. And they take up hobbies that they find out they're unsuitable. Some people buy a bunch of cameras and take pictures, and they find out that that isn't what they wanted to do. Other people buy a whole lot of fishing equipment, and they go fishing and find out that isn't what they wanted to do as a hobby, and they have trouble.
Some of them have great visions of the traveling they
right.
hope to do.
And they don't
But
do
that wears out too.
It wears out
Often.
too, you bet. Anyway, I was lucky. I was very lucky. I already had a couple of hobbies. I played golf, and I took up playing a little snooker, and that takes time. Learning how to do it, first of all. I never did learn how to hit a golf ball properly, but anyway, there are people that don't retire. And they carry on with their job, and they stay there as long as their boss will let them. And very often they overstay their welcome. That's very unfortunate when that happens.
And often they've made a great contribution.
Oh yes, there's no doubt about that.
But if you hang on too long, you're remembered for the days that weren't the glory days.
I know that as I approached my retirement, when I was going to pull the pin, I was just 3 weeks before I had decided to leave. I ended up having an accident with my back. I herniated a disc in my back. This would be in '82. And I had to go down to St. Michael's Hospital in Toronto, and they did a repair job on my spine. And I might say that it was very, very successful. I was there in March, and I went down I was admitted on a Sunday, had the operation on Tuesday, and I drove home from Toronto in my car on Wednesday. And I was back playing golf in June.
My goodness, it used to be that you'd be laid up for months.
Yeah, that's right. But this was a new process called chymopapine. It's an injection. They poke a needle into your back about 10 inches long, and it goes right into the disc. And they pump in an enzyme, and the enzyme eats up the disc.
For goodness sakes.
And it
And took the pressure off the nerve then.
took the pressure off the nerve, and I was up walking the hall a matter of hours after I come out of the operating room, and I didn't have a pain at all. It was
Amazing.
gone.
No.
But anyway, in April '83, I finally did leave the company. They had a new man to take my place, and he had pretty well taken over the job, and he was doing all right. So, for a couple of years, I concentrated on learning how to hit a golf ball. And when I finally found how impossible that was, I decided maybe I could try curling. And after a while, when the skips all decided that I was too blind to see the broom, they made me a skip, and from then on, it was clear sailing. But anyway, you can't curl and you can't golf all the time, and I had a lot of evenings I wanted to spend at my hobby, and I went to an auction sale and I bought a small engine lathe. And I had that put in my basement, along with a new drill press that I bought. And then I built myself a world-class workbench out of a slab door from Mac Phillips Hospital. When they were tearing it down, I bought a couple of their big slab doors, and it makes a beautiful bench. And then I was ready to take on any kind of a repair job whatsoever. The first job I got was my wife's can opener, and I decided right away it was too old to repair, and I bought a new one. That fixed that.
I don't know whether you'd say that is a successful endeavor.
Oh yeah, that was successful.
Well, that was the easy way out, by buying a new one. But
anyway,
since then you've been busy, though.
Oh yes, and later on in 1985, I got a call from Georgian College, and Mike Trainer called me up and asked me if I would be interested in steering a class of millwrights. Their instructor had run into difficulties between his job and Georgian College, and so he had to choose his job, and the class was left in midair with no instructor. So I took it on and finished that session, and we had about 20 odd men, all of them employed at their jobs, all of them trying to upgrade themselves, and I did that for 2 sessions, 2 years. And on that period, there was only one chap that failed to meet the requirements of the apprenticeship board, which I felt was fairly successful.
And you enjoyed that?
Oh, yes, I enjoyed
Of
it.
course, you're back working in a machine shop.
They had a nice machine shop there. They had half a dozen engine lathes, and they had 2 or 3 milling machines and drill presses, and it had all the necessary equipment. And it was a matter of making sure that the boys learned how to operate them safely and productively. We also had some girls in that class that were taking the course along with the men.
Now, did they expect to become a machine apprentices?
Of course,
Or
they really did, yes.
They did.
Oh, Jack, when I was in Iberville, there was a big machine shop there, and ran by a man named Rainville. He specialized in all manner of hydraulics, and he, of course, hoped to have a son to take over, but he didn't. He had a daughter, and I never saw a better foreman in all my life than she was.
Machine shop foreman.
She was a machine shop foreman, and she knew her things, believe me.
Oh, well, of course. It's just what we're used to.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Now, when this was rather an amazing thing, could have been a very serious thing. When did you go on the holiday to Florida? That you just about came across.
I was going to say that I found out about 1986 how hazardous retirement can be to your health. But before I go into that, I wanted to mention that I also did some instructing at Monroe. The Monroe people had a group of inspectors that needed some guidance and training.
The shock absorber company.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
In operation of their instruments. They had inspectors that were learning, going over from English measure to metric, and they had instruments to check the incoming material, which they didn't know how to read. And it was unfortunate that they had run into some difficulties. Anyway, I spent some time up there and ran 2 or 3 classes of instruction on the handling metric measuring equipment. But getting back to this being hazardous, as I said earlier, I have 3 1/4 acres of land here, and it does require quite a bit of attention. You have to keep the nuisance trees cut all over the property, and you have to keep the weeds down, and you have to keep the place tidied up. And in 1986, I was doing just that with my lawnmower, my riding lawnmower, and I had a terrible accident. The groundhogs managed to dig a hole that I didn't know was there, and it caused the accident. And my lawnmower upset and into a ditch, and I hung onto it just too long. And I ended up almost losing a leg at the knee. Dr. Coetzee put it all back together with 3.5-inch screw nails and sewed me all up with many, many stitches. But anyway, I was a while getting over that.
Now, had it not been for a neighbor, the machine was on top of you.
No, the machine wasn't on top of me.
It wasn't on top of you.
No, I had flung myself over the ditch, knowing that I wasn't going to be in any trouble. But the lawnmower landed upside down on the seat, and it rebounded on the spring, and it caught me. As I was going over, it bounced up. It bounced up, and as I was going over the top of it, and it caught me.
Well, it's a good thing the neighbor knows this.
Yeah, Brian Gibson came to my rescue. His wife saw me disappear, and she said to him, "You better go and see what happened." So he came over and ran back and phoned for an ambulance, and 20 minutes after the accident, I was in the hospital. Couldn't beat that.
Oh, wow.
Well then, getting back to this hazardous to your health.
That's right, you almost had another
we had another
thing that could have
bad
been a
accident.
fatality.
In 1990, Tom Playford and I went down to Florida to play some golf, and we were waiting to meet the chap that lived down there, and we were in a parking lot in front of an ice cream store waiting for him to come, and 4 black men with a gun come out behind the car and caught us unawares, and we got mugged. Make a long story short, we got mugged and mugged properly. They fancied Tom's Buick, and they took it and all his money, and him too, and made off down the highway with them. And the only reason they didn't get my money was because they left me laying on the asphalt with my head split open. I was leaking all over my head.
Did you try to fight them off or something?
Oh yes, we did. We put up quite a tussle, but it didn't amount to.
4 of them.
In Florida, in Bellevue. It's near Ocala. We found out after that these 4 blacks came out of a crack house. They had, that's where they had come from. Mm-hmm. Anyway, they took the car and all our luggage and our dignity and everything else. And
you were
We were left laying there.
You were left laying there.
Yes, I was.
They pistol whipped you.
Pistol whipped me. I had my
I think
head
that's
split
what it's
open.
called.
And but anyway, we did get the car back a week or so later, and some of our luggage, but not all of it. Police rounded up the people. They found out who they were, and they charged one of them with assault with a deadly weapon, and he ended up with 18 months probation.
That's justice. And it could have cost you your life.
Oh, if the gun wouldn't fire. They had somehow jammed 2 shells in the breech of a semi-automatic handgun, and it wouldn't fire. They definitely were doing their best to make it fire. Anyway.
So you recovered from that.
Yes.
That's it.
Yeah, we stayed on. We decided, I think, that Florida wasn't one of our favorite places, and although we did go back once again, another year or so after that, we went back to the same area, and we kept the car doors locked a lot more.
I guess so.
But anyway, my little workshop in the basement takes a lot of my time, and I spend quite a bit of time with a couple of my special friends, Ed Bartlett and Lou Curra. They're instrument makers, musical instrument makers. They make violins and cellos and bass fiddles, and they have really sophisticated workshops, both of them. And
But this is what they specialize
that's what they specialize in. And from time to time, they require some kind of special tools.
Mm-hmm.
As you know, a violin has a tapered string peg, and the cello, and these tapered pegs fit in tapered holes, and they need reamers to ream those holes. And I make the reamers.
Oh, I see.
And that's just one of the items I make. Odds and ends, whatever they need.
You have the time for this sort of thing, and you find it interesting.
Oh, I find it interesting, and I usually have to.
You sure perform a great service as far as they're concerned.
They're happy.
Oh, I could believe it. I could believe it.
Ed Bartlett just completed a big double bass fiddle, and has already sold it. And I had a small part in getting that fiddle made. I made some of the jigs and fixtures, and I made the tapered reamers that went up into the butt end of the bass fiddle for the end pin. I made the end pins and the socket for it. So that, plus my golf, plus my snooker, takes most of my time. I read books.
But you have the evenings, though.
Pardon?
So you have the evenings.
Oh.
So you're doing quite a bit of reading now.
I read a lot of books. I read about 5 books a month, or at least.
Mm-hmm.
And it depends on how much time I spend in the basement, how many books I read.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's all of my retirement, Jack.
But your retirement it's been a happy time for you, and you've been able to help many people out.
I'd appreciate it if you'd come back in about 10 years and ask me how my retirement's going.
I hope we're both here in 10 years, feeling as well as we do today.
Anyway, Jack, I want to thank you and your crew for giving me this opportunity to record some of my past. I don't know if anybody will ever look at it, but if they do, they'll at least know what I stood for.
I hope I'm not overstating the case. I don't think I am. But Kennedy's was one of our really important industries, maybe the industry for, goodness gracious, getting on to 150 years. Certainly more than 125 years. And I think we're very fortunate in having an opportunity to dock about Kennedy's with you and with Jack Agnew. You've both had interesting lives beyond your experiences with the Kennedys. That's where the major part of your working career was spent with Kennedy, William Kennedy's and Sons. And there are a couple of other employees that we'd like to interview and have them talk about their experiences and the memories they have. But beyond that, you and certainly your wife Ruth have made great contributions as citizens. And Ruth is a very dedicated, kind-hearted person. And so I think you can look back on your life with great satisfaction. And I feel sure your daughter, Jane, and your sons, named after your father, Stan, they are no doubt proud of both their father and mother, and I think your grandchildren will be equally proud. And when they hear of some of these experiences on this tape, I think that'll add to the pride that they have in the fact that you've had a very successful career and you've been a fine citizen of Owen Sound. So we've been able to
as they say,
highlight a few
Jack,
of these things.
all's well that ends well.
Let's hope so. Thank you. It's been a great pleasure for me, Elgin. So there, taking a heck of a long